Do you think they'll be switching currencies? What's your take on all of this?
We need to turn back the pages in history and first look at what has happened in Greece. There have been bailouts in Greece where the people had to suffer as a result of the CDS and other derivatives, other banking fraud which has taken place, gambling, and has destroyed that country. As a result of all of this, the IMF has basically taken over. And we look to 2015. This is the best example of tyranny that you will see, economic tyranny. They had a referendum, and instead they voted no to the bailout in this referendum. They said, no, we don't want the bailout. Tell them to screw off, basically. And immediately they said, no, we're going to proceed with the bailout. So this is exactly what happens when you look at those in control. You have the IMF, any of the supranational entities, basically. And they will undoubtedly take every measure possible to make sure that they get every one of those precious assets. That's what's happening in Greece. They are being raped and pillaged of everything valuable. And it's not just, bank accounts at risk or anything else. I'm talking about actual assets. I mean, they're selling off airports, islands, companies. Everything is basically at a fire sale price right now. Greece will reject bailouts. They can reject anything, but ultimately the plan goes ahead as normal. That's just the way it is because they're not in control. Their sovereignty, just like every other country basically to a different degree, has lost their sovereignty to these supranational entities, one of them being the IMF. In terms of, the future of Greece, I definitely do see them, I see both sides to it. They should leave the Eurozone right now, and they should go back to their own currency. Of course, that would cause major havoc. They can't do that right away without having something bad happening. There's a recent economist who basically suggested that they would use the US dollar temporarily. I don't know if they can necessarily do that, but ultimately there's going to be some short-term pain if they do leave. The reason I don't think that would happen is simply because they were put into the Eurozone knowing they couldn't handle it. There's no way they would be able to get their debt down. There was no way they would be able to control any of these, restrictions that the EU has in place. It's just not possible. But they brought them in anyway. Why? Because they want them to be part of this global governance package. And that right there is the ultimate goal, to get everyone under control of the hands of the few. That's what I see for Greece.
So you don't think they're going to be able to meet that 3.5% GDP mark where they're saying, oh yeah, Greece is improving right now? I mean, do you see Greece improving at all?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, they're just stuck in debt. And even if they take on more debt, it doesn't really help anyone. It doesn't help the people at all, does it?
It basically, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because it's constantly being put into more debt. Greece is constantly being put into more debt, and this is all as a result of what? Too much debt. It's really silly, to see it when you look at it from the outside, but ultimately this is the plan. They're doing the same thing in Spain, they're doing the same thing in Italy, they're doing the same thing in Portugal. All over the world they do it, and it's very successful for those in control because you punish the countries, you make people poor, you increase unemployment, and people get desperate. As a result, they have to start selling off their assets. This is the way that you transfer wealth from the middle class and the poor to the wealthy. It's been working for so long now, and they're just continuing this process.
Now, you mentioned some of the other EU countries like France and Italy, and what we're seeing is that there's a movement right now to get away from the EU. We know that the UK already had a referendum. We see France is moving down that path with Marine Le Pen. She says, if she's elected, we're going to have a Frexit. And we see it in Italy. So from all this happening right now, and all these countries saying, you know something, we've been in the EU, it has not helped us at all. Actually, unemployment's very high. We're in a lot of debt. From all of this happening right now, if all these countries start to leave, do you see the EU collapsing?
I do believe it is collapsing right now. I think that you can't hold together an EU with basically Germany at the helm. It's just not going to work. You can't have one country doing well and the rest of them basically all fading away and have this be supported. It just doesn't work. The only thing that I do see is that the countries may fall away, but then actually it will snowball into something even bigger, even worse. That's what really concerns me. Now, the whole Brexit thing is very positive. I mean, the fact that they could leave the Eurozone would be excellent. It would be a great thing. I'm not sure if it's actually going to end up happening. We've seen the beginning of the talks start to occur, but they're already suggesting that they're going to have to pay a lot of money, and that, of course, isn't going to go over too well. It's going to be a lot of back and forth with it. I think the Eurozone is basically all of the countries are all hurting in one way or another. We can see what's happening with the whole migrant crisis. It's causing a big burden. And there's also, the safety and security issues that are being escalating seemingly every single day. I don't know how it can survive. I mean, if I just think of it logically and sort of on paper, then no, it's going to fall. The EU itself will no longer be there, let's say 10, 20 years down the road. But the only way that the powers that be would let this happen is if they have that solution already prepared. I don't know what that is. My thinking has been always, I even talk about in my new book, that, in the end, you will have a new monetary system, and that would allow them to have even more collaboration and consolidation of power. They haven't really been speaking about that too much, specifically in the euro. I mean, you have things like the ESM, and that's sort of meant to take power away from the specific nations. And I just haven't seen something really on a bigger scale than the EU. So I'm a little stepping back a little bit and just trying to see it as it happens.
Yeah, and we could see that with all this debt and with all this unemployment, with negative interest rates, it looks like everything is primed to dump whatever currencies we have now and move into a completely different system. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like we reached the point where we can't go any further right now. And people are waking up right now and seeing that, something, they've had their chance, and the economies of the world and the people's lives of the world, it hasn't improved at all. It's actually gotten worse under this model. And when we look at the United States and we look at the economy here, I know in the United States that we've been kept under this illusion that everything is fine. And Donald Trump came out when he was having a press conference saying that, yes, he inherited a mess. The economy is a mess. He went on to say the Middle East is a mess. When you look at the economy, what do you see? Do you see a strong, vibrant economy, or do you see the economy deteriorating, falling apart?
I see a rotting carcass, and it's simply, it's trying to present itself as if everything's okay. And and I'm sure most of your viewers know, when you are out of the workforce for 1 year, you are then wiped off the statistics. I mean, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. And you look at the civilian labor force participation rate, which shows consistently over these years, it's just been declining. There are less people employed now than there were decades ago. It doesn't make any sense when you look at it. When you see the news and they're saying, unemployment is this and that, this many jobs have been added this month. I mean, the jobs reports, which, by the way, those in the financial industry pay particular attention to the jobs reports. That's like the key thing. They wait every month to see what the jobs will be like. And then they, run off their traders on everything based on these. It's so silly because they're the same people being hired over and over again. The economy is dead. The economy is not coming back. That's silly to think it is. It's being replaced by robotics and automation. That's just the way it is. That's why you have country after country talking about the guaranteed basic income. They have different names for it, but basically everybody gets welfare. That's the new plan. That's the new model. They're testing it out in different cities, but that's the new model. Replace your job with a robot. Here's some welfare.
Yeah, but can the country survive on that? Is it possible?
There's going to be maximum poverty out there. Everybody's going to get just enough, but then maybe everybody will also have to be on some sort of food stamps. Maybe they will have their own social assistance programs that will help those in need. I mean, I don't know how it's going to all unfold. The fact is that they would have to be able to take over all the resources. That's where I see it, because as the people end up in poverty, the government has to take on more and more. And perhaps they will take assets. I don't know how it's all going to work. I think the corporations will probably have a big hand in it. These major corporations, big corporations will be, don't worry about it. We'll take over this sector. We'll take over that sector. And suddenly you start have this, fascist type of state occurring.
Well, yeah, from what you're saying, it sounds like the government will control your life. You'll be dependent on the government for everything.
Entirely. That is the goal. That's the ultimate goal. But who's controlling the governments? Obviously, we know that it is the major corporations. When you have your friends in all of the alumni of all these corporations are somehow working in the highest positions in government, you know what's going on.
That is true. We see countries right now and creditors, they're dumping treasuries. Why do you think this is happening right now? Do they know something that we don't?
I think it's short term, personally, because when I've looked at the different charts, I do see, the ups and downs. And then it reverses and it goes back the other way. If it is going to continue on a grand scale, we're in for one heck of a ride. I think it's more of a short-term thing, and I don't see that China and Japan are really going to let go of the US dollar all right now, or let's say within the next, year or two. I think that's going to, move up and down a little bit. We're probably trade in a range with those, and I don't see it necessarily falling down to the ground at this time. Eventually, China, you can tell they've made it public that they want to do away with the US dollar. They don't want it anymore, or at least to the degree that they're invested in it right now. That's very clear. The Federal Reserve, of course, will have to be there to pick up the slack. They will be buying up all the debt. That's no problem. They'll just run the printing presses, and they'll do what they always do, and that is devalue the US dollar. China specifically, though, less so Japan, will definitely be diversifying. And you could see even investment. China is investing in Africa. They're investing in Venezuela. They're having, their investments all over the world. In fact, getting into places where the U.S. isn't. That's one of the very important things as well. They're obviously partnered with Russia. So I do see them slowly, over a long period of time, weaning themselves off of the U.S. debt and the U.S. dollar.
Now, we see that Iran, they dumped the dollar. It's going to be in March where they officially dumped the dollar. And they're blaming this on Trump's travel ban, which I feel is absolutely ridiculous because, all the wars that are happening in the Middle East, the war that's happening in Syria, where Iran is fighting against the U.S. paid mercenaries, that wasn't a problem for them. But a temporary travel ban, that was the problem, and that's why we had to dump the dollar. Do you really think that's the real reason why Iran dumped the dollar, or do you think they planned this all along?
Well, as far as I've been able to read up on this, that in many cases, they've already stopped using the US dollar. It isn't like, on March 21st, they're just going to drop it and that's it. It has already been going this way, going this route. They've done deals with India for oil and gold trades. They've been trying to do away with it for some time. Now this is just going to mark like the official day where we're not going to use it anymore. We're not going to price any of our goods in US dollar. The reason why, it's anybody's guess. They're suggesting it's the travel ban, but obviously we know that that isn't the case. The country itself doesn't care about the people. That's what we know. I mean, the government doesn't care about the actual individual. And it's not just Iran, but you look at around the world. Other countries too, they don't care about their own people. They care about who are those in control, those most powerful. Not the average individual who now all of a sudden can travel. They really don't care. That's the way I see it.
Let's move into the markets right now. I mean, we're seeing the stock market continually move up right now, and we're above 20,000 points. Do you see a market correction coming, or do you think this thing is going to go much, much higher?
At this point, it's all dependent on interest rates. If interest rates rise too high, and it doesn't take much, then I think that we will definitely have a correction. I mean, the stock market is actually at this point right now, historically speaking, overdue for a normal cycle, normal pattern of bull and bear market. We are supposed to be heading into a crash at some point, not even, what I call the global economic collapse. Not even that, just a normal market correction should be occurring. But of course, it can always be supported with QE. If they're really adamant to increase interest rates, which I don't think they're going to go that strong on this anyway. I mean, if the last few years or decade even have been any sign, we know specifically that they're going to continue to go slow. But once it gets to a certain point, the national debt becomes unpayable. And I mean, it already is anyway. And then you look at everything else which has surfaced over these years. I mean, you can't possibly fix this. The only solution is to print. And they have to engage in QE4 at some point in the near future. I'm sure under the table they're doing this anyway. But I'm talking about right in our face, QE4. Let's get the printing presses going. Let's get the quote-unquote economy going. Although we know that printing money, handing it to banks so that the CEO can buy a new penthouse somewhere isn't exactly the best way to get the economy going, but this is what they do. They do it every time, and this is not going to be any different. Look to interest rates to determine the stock market ups and downs.
Now, Janet Yellen, she was testifying on Capitol Hill, and she said something very interesting because when Obama left office, he said, I'm handing a strong economy off to Trump. And of course, Trump came out today and we just discussed it that, he inherited a complete mess. And Janet Yellen, all of a sudden, after telling us over the last many years that the economy is getting stronger, better, it looks good, all of a sudden she's saying that she's disappointed in the economy, that the economy is weakening. And if things should start to rapidly fall apart, don't blame the Fed. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, but what was it, like maybe 6 weeks ago, she was out there saying that the economy, was doing pretty darn good. And now all of a sudden it's weakening, it's disappointing, and if things go wrong, don't blame us. What do you make of this?
I find it's really silly when you see back and forth between the central bank and the government. You always see this back and forth. They say, okay, it's you have to do your stimulus, or you have to do your money printing. It's you guys. And then they turn around and say, look, it's their fault why the economy is not going. They're the ones that have to deal with it. They just fight back and forth. They bicker and try to blame each other. It's all about this silly finger pointing game that they play. The economy is dead because of intervention. That's the reason why, because they continuously try to do these crazy experiments. Even Rothschild just came out. It was this week. He said this is the biggest experiment they've ever done right now with all the quantitative easing and the interest rates and everything else. And what I would say is that the more they intervene, the worse it will get. Janet Yellen is just a mouthpiece for those really in control. She's just doing what she has to do. She gets up there, she gives a little speech. Janet Yellen, before becoming the chair, said I'll paraphrase her, if it were positive to take interest rates into the negative territory, I would vote for that. I mean, this is how crazy these people are, that they're willing to destroy the currency of their own country. That's how you know these people don't work for the people, for the general public. So the economy, they don't care about it. It's not going to get any better Because if they really wanted to, they would step back. 1920, there was a depression. Not 1929, but 1920. There was a depression where the market collapsed significantly. But the Federal Reserve, in their infancy, they didn't react to it. And what happened? Within a year and a half, everything was booming yet again. And then we brought ourselves into the roaring 20s. And then, of course, you know what happened. There was a lot of intervention at that point. But they stepped back. They didn't do anything. They cut federal spending, if I'm not mistaken, by 60%. This is what needs to happen. You need to step back. They need to cut, but they can't do that now, because if you reform entitlements, you are going to have mass upheaval. You're going to have civil unrest and riots like you have never seen before.
Well, don't you think that's actually coming no matter what? I mean, yes, people say that they can keep the economy going forever, but you know, from experience and from history, you can see that nothing lasts forever. At one point, one time, sometime in the future, the entire system's going to fall apart, even with universal basic income, because when people aren't out there working, when people aren't spending money, I mean, it's just not going to be enough. Getting your $500, $600 or whatever it is a month, it will not be enough for people, because I mean, what we're seeing right now is inflation is creeping up at this point, and the dollar is continually losing value. And there's no way that this debt level can be sustained, because we already see federal tax receipts, they are declining. State tax receipts, they are declining, which means there's less revenue coming into the government to pay for that debt. And if the interest rates pop up just a little bit, well, we have a major, major problem. And eventually what's going to happen is that all these programs, the food stamps, the welfare, and everything else will come to an end. And like you said, we will see civil war, riots, and, you know, we don't know how long this is going to last. Actually, I interviewed Cliff High. He said this is going to last about 5 years. And we see right now we're on that path. So do you see the U.S. actually preparing for a civil war, riots, and whatnot?
There are many documents which are either, you know, declassified or they're simply publicly available, which show the U.S. has been making preparations to engage in, I would say, preparations for the prevention or the dealing with civil war on U.S. soil. There have been numerous occasions where you have black helicopters flying low overhead in major cities, starting to freak people out. There's explosions going off, guns are being shot. People freak out. They don't know what the heck is going on. They call the police. They're just fearful. They don't know what's happening. And, they find out later on, sorry, yeah, that was just a test we were running. This happens so often in all these different cities. And they don't even warn people in advance. They've done testing where they spray chemicals into the subway system. They are doing all of these different tests. They have documentation available from army.mil, from all these different websites that show you specifically, yes, we are preparing for the military to take the streets. That is a fact. We know that they are preparing for it. Now, some would say, look, it's just good to be prepared and all this stuff. But it shows you how bad things have become. You don't need to necessarily go to this depth. I mean, the preparations, they're spending a lot of money, a lot of resources locally, specifically to take on the American public. I mean, you see the way that they're actors, basically. They're dressed up. They're wearing, the John Deere hats and everything else. I mean, they are set up to be the American public. And that's the way I see it anyway. I think that the conditions, as you said about the guaranteed income and things, look at what's happening in Venezuela. This is the perfect example. And I've been hearing about it from people from Venezuela specifically, and they've told me how bad things are. I mean, when you have to wait in a lineup to get simple things like bread, everything is rationed. Everything. Don't worry about it because the government's going to control everything. We'll take care of you, right? Wrong. 2 hours in a lineup, and if your ID doesn't have the specific digits on it. They run this lottery, and do you get your bread today? Yes or no? No? Well, then you got to buy it in the black market, and it's 10 times the price. That's what's coming. You want to know what's headed in our direction? It's Venezuela. And when I say our direction, that means Canada, the US, the UK, it doesn't matter. All the Western nations in the major cities are going to be run over, just like what's happening in Venezuela. Perhaps it'll take a little bit longer to get to that degree, but it's going to happen. It has to, just because of the path we are on. Nothing is going to change that because the globalists in control designed it to be this way.
David, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
If you go over to YouTube, The Money GPS, you can see me there. I also have just released, hot off the presses, my new book, The Money GPS Global Economic